She was pregnant with the heir he'd been desperate for, and he had no idea. Lady Elara Whitcomb pressed her palm against her still flat stomach, sitting in the shadows of the drawing room as servants moved past like ghosts. Upstairs, her husband was drafting annulment papers. 2 years of silent meals, separate bedrooms, and a marriage that existed only on parchment, and now he wanted to erase even that. She'd rehearsed the words 100 times. "I'm carrying your child." But when the door finally opened and Lord Adrian Hale stood there, cold and distant as winter stone, the words died in her throat. Because she realized something worse than being unloved. She'd never been seen at all. If you want to know whether she tells him the truth, or walks away with his heir and never looks back, stay until the end. Drop a like and comment what city you're watching from. Let's see how far this story can travel. The fire had gone out an hour ago. Elara noticed because she'd been watching it die, ember by ember, while the grandfather clock in the corner ticked through another evening alone. The drawing room of Blackridge Manor was all dark wood and heavy curtains, the kind of place that swallowed sound. She sat in the high-backed chair near the window, hands folded in her lap like she was posing for a portrait no one would ever paint. Outside, the November wind clawed at the glass. She was 24 years old. She'd been married for 2 years, 3 months, and 16 days. And in all that time, her husband had never once asked her how she was. Not really. Not in the way that meant he wanted to know the answer. "My lady." The voice came from the doorway. Margot, the head housekeeper, her face lined with the kind of sympathy that made Elara's chest tighten. She was holding a tray with tea that had probably gone cold 10 minutes ago. "His lordship requests your presence in the study." Elara didn't move. Her fingers curled slightly against the armrest. "Now?" "Yes, my lady." She could hear the reluctance in Margot's voice. The staff knew. They always knew. You couldn't hide a broken marriage in a house this quiet, not when the master of the estate barely acknowledged his wife's existence, not when separate wings might as well have been separate countries. Elara rose slowly, smoothing the front of her dress. It was gray. Most of her dresses were gray or pale blue now. She'd stopped wearing anything that demanded to be looked at. "Thank you, Margot." The older woman hesitated. "My lady, if you need anything." "I'm fine." The lie came out smooth. She'd had 2 years to practice it. The walk to Adrian's study felt longer than it should have. Blackridge Manor was enormous, a sprawling estate that had belonged to the Hale family for 6 generations. Every portrait on the walls was a reminder. Legacy, duty, lineage. The things that mattered, not love, never love. Her hand trembled slightly as she knocked. "Enter." Adrian's voice was clipped, efficient. The voice of a man who had more important things to do than waste time on niceties. She pushed the door open. He was standing behind his desk, bathed in lamplight, papers spread before him like battle plans. Lord Adrian Hale was handsome in the way cold things often are. Sharp jawline, dark hair that never seemed out of place, gray eyes that looked through people instead of at them. He was 31, controlled, precise. A man who measured his words like currency. He didn't look up when she entered. "Close the door." She did. The click of the latch felt too loud. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Elara stood near the doorway, hands clasped, waiting. This was how it always went. He summoned, she appeared, he delivered whatever instruction or criticism he deemed necessary, and then she was dismissed. But tonight felt different. Tonight, his shoulders were tense, his jaw was tight, and when he finally looked at her, there was something in his expression she couldn't quite name. Not anger, not exactly. Resignation, maybe. "Sit." She moved to the chair across from his desk, her movements careful. The room smelled like leather and old books, and the faint trace of whiskey he never drank in front of her. Adrian stayed standing. "I'll be direct," he said. "This isn't working." Her heart lurched, but she kept her face still. "What isn't working?" "This." He gestured vaguely between them, as if their entire marriage could be summarized with a flick of his wrist. "Our arrangement. Arrangement. Not marriage. Not partnership. Arrangement." "I see," she said quietly. "I don't think you do." He exhaled, running a hand through his hair, one of the few gestures that ever betrayed any emotion. "When we married, it was understood that this was a matter of practicality. Your family needed financial stability. Mine needed an heir," she finished. His eyes narrowed slightly. "Yes, The word landed like a stone. And you haven't provided one. There it was. The truth she'd been avoiding, the weight she'd been carrying alone for weeks now. She was pregnant. 10 weeks. If the doctor she'd seen in secret was correct. 10 weeks of nausea she'd hidden, of exhaustion she'd disguised as indifference, of a secret growing inside her that she hadn't yet decided what to do with. And Adrian had no idea, because she hadn't told him. Because part of her, the part that had spent 2 years trying to be enough, trying to matter, trying to earn even a shred of warmth from this man, had wanted to wait, to be sure, to find the right moment. But there was no right moment. There never had been. I've consulted with my solicitor, Adrian continued, his tone as businesslike as if he were discussing grain imports. An annulment is possible given the circumstances. It will be quiet, discreet. Your family will be compensated appropriately, and you'll retain a reasonable settlement. Elara stared at him. An annulment? Yes. You're ending this. I am. His expression didn't change. You'll be free to remarry if you choose. I'll make sure the terms are generous. You won't be left destitute. How considerate. Her fingers dug into the fabric of her skirt, nails biting through the layers. She felt something rising in her chest, anger maybe, or grief, or the horrible hollowed-out feeling of being discarded like a broken tool. May I ask why now? Her voice was steady. She was proud of that. Adrian frowned as if the question itself was inconvenient. Because it's been 2 years, Elara, 2 years of... He stopped himself, jaw working. This isn't what either of us wanted. You're miserable. He exhaled. We're both wasting time. So you've decided? Yes. Without discussing it with me. I'm discussing it now. No. Her voice sharpened just slightly. You're informing me. There's a difference. For the first time, something flickered in his eyes. Surprise, maybe. She so rarely pushed back. I assumed you'd be relieved, he said. And that was what broke something inside her. Because he was right. She should have been relieved. She should have leapt at the chance to escape this tomb of a marriage. To leave behind the cold dinners and the empty bed and the crushing, suffocating loneliness of being married to someone who looked at you like you were wallpaper. But she wasn't relieved. She was holding his child, and she had no idea what to do about it. You're right, she said quietly. I should be relieved. Adrian blinked, clearly not expecting agreement. But I need time. For what? To process this. To make arrangements. She stood, smoothing her skirts again. It was a nervous habit she couldn't break. You're asking me to walk away from my life, Adrian. I think I'm entitled to a few days to adjust. He studied her for a long moment, and she could see him calculating, weighing whether this was reasonable or just another inconvenience. 1 week, he said finally. After that, the papers will be filed. 1 week. She nodded. Thank you. The formality of it was absurd. They were ending a marriage with the same detachment they'd lived it. She turned to leave. Elara? She paused, hand on the door. For what it's worth. His voice was quieter now, almost human. I never wanted to hurt you. She looked back at him, this man she'd tried so hard to reach, and felt nothing but a dull, aching emptiness. I know, she said. You never wanted anything from me at all. She left before he could respond. Her room was in the east wing, far enough from Adrian's quarters that they might as well have lived in different houses. It was tastefully decorated, all soft creams and pale golds, the kind of space designed to be pleasant and utterly forgettable. She closed the door and leaned against it, eyes shut, heart pounding. 1 week. She had 1 week to decide whether to tell him about the baby. The logical part of her brain, the part that had been trained since childhood to be practical, to think ahead, to survive, said she had to. A child changed everything. An heir changed everything. If Adrian knew, he wouldn't annul the marriage. He'd keep her. Not because he wanted her, but because she'd finally done the one thing he'd married her to do. But the thought of it, of watching his face shift from indifference to cold calculation, of becoming nothing more than an incubator for the Heir legacy, made her stomach turn. She crossed to the window, pressing her forehead against the cool glass. Outside, the garden stretched into darkness, skeletal trees swaying in the wind. She'd spent 2 years trying to make this marriage work. 2 years of careful smiles and polite conversation and desperate silent hope that maybe, if she was patient enough, kind enough, useful enough, he'd see her. But he never had, and now he wanted her gone. Her hand drifted to her stomach again, resting there. "What do I do?" she whispered to the glass, to the night, to the tiny life she was carrying. No answer came. Mom. She didn't sleep that night. Instead, she sat at the small writing desk in her room, a single candle burning, and wrote out her options. Option 1. Tell Adrian about the pregnancy. Stay in the marriage, raise the child as the heir, live the rest of her life as a glorified broodmare, knowing she was only kept because of the baby. Option 2. Say nothing. Accept the annulment. Leave Blackridge. Raise the child alone in secret, away from this world entirely. The ink on the page blurred slightly. She blinked hard, refusing to cry. Crying didn't solve problems. She stared at the two paths before her, and for the first time in her life, she realized something startling. She had a choice. Not a good choice. Not an easy one. But a choice nonetheless. And the woman she'd been 2 years ago, the woman who'd walked into this marriage hopeful and eager to please, would have chosen option 1 without question, would have told Adrian immediately, would have prioritized duty and security and the life she'd been raised to accept. But that woman was gone. She died slowly, quietly, over 26 months of silence. What was left was something sharper, something harder, something that refused to beg. Elara set down the pen and stared at the paper. And then, with a steady hand, she drew a line through option 1. The next morning, she requested a carriage. "Where to, my lady?" the driver asked, confused. Lady Elara never went anywhere. "The village," she said. "I need to see the apothecary." It wasn't a lie, not entirely. She did need to see the apothecary. She needed to confirm what she already knew, needed to understand what carrying a child alone would actually mean. But more than that, she needed to move, to do something, to stop sitting in that horrible room waiting for Adrian to decide her future. The village of Greymont sat at the edge of the Heir estate, a cluster of stone buildings and narrow streets that serviced the manor and the surrounding farms. Elara had been there only a handful of times. Adrian didn't encourage her involvement in estate business, and she'd learned early on that her presence was more tolerated than welcomed. But today, she didn't care. The apothecary was a narrow shop that smelled like dried herbs and dust. An older man with spectacles looked up from his work as she entered, surprise flickering across his face. "Lady Hale," he said, bowing slightly. "How may I assist you?" She lowered her hood. "I need a consultation, privately." He hesitated, then gestured toward a back room. 20 minutes later, she emerged with a small bundle of herbs and the confirmation she'd been dreading. 10 weeks, healthy as far as he could tell. She'd need rest, proper nutrition, and regular check-ins as the pregnancy progressed. "And the father?" the apothecary asked carefully. Elara's expression didn't change. "Irrelevant." His eyebrows rose, but he was smart enough not to press. She paid him double his fee for his discretion and left. The carriage ride back to Blackridge felt different, heavier. She stared out the window at the rolling fields, at the gray sky pressing down like a lid, and felt the weight of what she was about to do settle over her. She was going to leave. She was going to take the annulment, take her settlement, and disappear. Adrian would never know about the child, and the heir would grow up far away from this cold, lifeless place. It was insane, reckless, possibly the stupidest decision she'd ever made, but it was hers, and that made all the difference. I am io topastamam. 3 days later, she sat across from Adrian in his study again. He looked tired. She wondered if he'd slept at all since their last conversation. "I've made my decision," she said. He set down the letter he'd been reading. "And?" "I accept the annulment." Something shifted in his expression. Relief, maybe, or surprise that she hadn't fought. "I'll have the papers drawn up immediately," he said. "The settlement will be—" "I don't want the settlement." He stopped. "What?" "I don't want your money, Adrian." Elara, be reasonable. "I am being reasonable." Her voice was calm, steady. "I want enough to live modestly for a year. After that, I'll manage on my own." "That's absurd. You have no income. I'll find work." He stared at her like she'd suggested she sprout wings and fly. "Work," he repeated. "Yes." Doing what? I don't know yet. She met his gaze evenly. But I'll figure it out. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then he leaned back in his chair, studying her with an expression she couldn't read. You've changed, he said quietly. No. She stood. I just stopped pretending I hadn't. She left before he could argue. 1 week later, Lady Elara Whitcomb walked out of Blackridge Manor for the last time. She carried a single trunk, a small purse of coins, and a secret that would change everything. The annulment papers were signed. The marriage was over. And as the carriage pulled away from the estate, she didn't look back. Not once. Because the woman who'd arrived here 2 years ago, the woman who'd believed love could be earned through patience and silence, was gone. What remained was someone new. Someone who'd learned the hardest lesson of all. You can't make someone see you. You can only decide whether you're willing to disappear. And Elara Whitcomb was done disappearing. The road ahead was uncertain, dangerous, and completely unknown. But it was hers. And that was enough. The rain started an hour outside Greymont and hadn't stopped since. Elara pressed her forehead against the carriage window, watching the countryside blur into gray-green smudges. Water streamed down the glass in crooked lines, and somewhere in the distance, thunder rumbled like an afterthought. The driver, a hired man named Thomas, who'd asked no questions when she'd paid him in advance, called back through the rain. 2 more hours to Ashford, my lady. Roads are getting rough. She didn't correct him about the title. Lady Hale didn't exist anymore. The annulment had seen to that. We'll manage, she called back. Her hand rested on her stomach, hidden beneath the folds of her traveling cloak. 12 weeks now. Still no visible sign, but the nausea had gotten worse. This morning, she'd barely kept down the toast Margot had pressed into her hands before she'd left. Margot had cried. Elara hadn't. She'd used up all her tears years ago. The trunk beside her held everything she owned now. 3 dresses, undergarments, a few books, her mother's pearl earrings, and a leather pouch containing 200 pounds. It was the smallest settlement Adrian's solicitor had ever processed, and the man had looked at her like she'd lost her mind when she'd insisted. Maybe she had. But sanity was overrated when you'd spent 2 years living like a ghost. The carriage hit a rut, and she grabbed the handhold, her stomach lurching. She closed her eyes and breathed through her nose until the wave passed. You all right back there? Thomas shouted. Fine. Another lie. She was getting good at those. Ashford wasn't a destination, it was a waypoint. A small market town where she could catch a coach heading further north toward the village of Millbrook, where her Aunt Catherine lived. If she still lived there. If she'd even take Elara in. Catherine Ashworth was her mother's sister, a woman who'd scandalized the family 20 years ago by refusing to marry and instead opening a bookshop. Elara had met her exactly twice, once at her mother's funeral when she was 8, and once at a Christmas gathering where Catherine had told Elara's father exactly what she thought of arranged marriages. She'd been uninvited to every family event since, which made her perfect. The rain intensified. Through the downpour, Elara could make out the faint lights of Ashford appearing on the horizon, a cluster of buildings huddled against the storm like they were trying to keep warm. Thomas pulled the carriage up outside a coaching inn called the Red Stag. The sign swung violently in the wind, creaking like it might tear loose at any moment. I'll stable the horses, Thomas said, climbing down. You get inside. No coach heading north tonight? Storm's too bad. You'll have to wait till morning. Elara's chest tightened. She couldn't afford to waste a night here. Couldn't afford the room. Couldn't afford the delay. Every day she stayed in the same county as Blackridge was a day Adrian might hear something, might start asking questions. But the alternative was traveling through a storm that was getting worse by the minute. She grabbed her small traveling bag and stepped down into the mud. The rain hit her immediately, soaking through her cloak in seconds. She hurried toward the inn's entrance, boots squelching. Inside, the air was thick with smoke and the smell of wet wool and beer. A fire roared in the hearth, surrounded by travelers who looked just as miserable as she felt. The innkeeper, a broad woman with sharp eyes and flour on her apron, looked up from the bar. Room? Yes, 1 night. 4 shillings. Elara counted out the coins carefully. 4 shillings was more than she wanted to spend, but she didn't have a choice. The woman took the money and handed her a key. Upstairs, second door on the left. Supper's included if you want it. Thank you. The room was small and drafty, with a narrow bed and a wash basin that had a crack running through it, but it was dry, and right now that was enough. Elara peeled off her wet cloak and hung it on the peg by the door. Her dress was damp, but not soaked. She'd manage. She sat on the edge of the bed and allowed herself exactly 30 seconds to feel the full weight of what she'd done. She'd left. She'd actually left. No home, no husband, no safety net. Just a pregnant woman with 200 pounds and a desperate hope that her estranged aunt wouldn't slam the door in her face. The 30 seconds ended. She stood, smoothed her skirts, and went downstairs for supper. The common room was crowded. Elara found a small table near the back and ordered stew and bread. When it came, it was thin and greasy, but she ate it anyway. The baby needed food, even if she didn't want it. "Mind if I sit?" She looked up. A woman about her age stood there, holding a mug of something that smelled like cider. She had dark hair pulled into a messy bun and the kind of direct gaze that suggested she didn't wait for permission often. Elara hesitated, then nodded. The woman sat. "I'm Clara. You look like you've had a day. Is it that obvious? You're eating in stew and you haven't complained once. That's either desperation or good manners, and you don't strike me as the desperate type." Elara almost laughed. "You'd be surprised." Clara took a sip of her cider, studying Elara over the rim of the mug. "Running from something or towards something? Does it matter?" "Not really. Just making conversation." She set the mug down. "I'm heading north tomorrow if the storm clears. Millbrook, you?" Elara's pulse quickened. "Millbrook?" "Yeah, my sister lives there. I'm a seamstress. She's been begging me to move up. Says there's work, you know it? I'm going there too." The words came out before she could stop them. Clara's eyebrows rose. "Small world. You have family there?" "An aunt, maybe. I haven't seen her in years." "Well, if the coach runs tomorrow, we can share the fare. Cheaper that way." It was practical, smart, exactly the kind of arrangement Elara needed to be making. "All right," she said. "Thank you." Clara grinned. "Don't thank me yet. You haven't heard me complain about my sister's husband for 3 hours straight." Despite everything, Elara felt the corner of her mouth twitch. They talked for another hour. Surface-level things. Nothing too personal. Clara was funny, blunt, the kind of person who said exactly what she thought and didn't apologize for it. It was refreshing after 2 years of careful, measured conversations designed to offend no one. When Elara finally excused herself and went upstairs, she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Not hope, exactly, but not hopelessness either. Something in between. She slept poorly. The storm kept her awake, rattling the window and howling through the eaves. Every time she drifted off, she dreamed she was back at Blackridge, walking through empty rooms, calling Adrian's name. He never answered. She woke before dawn, throat dry, hands shaking. Downstairs, the innkeeper was already up, stoking the fire. "Storm's past," she said without looking up. "Coach leaves at 8. Elara nodded and went to the wash basin. Her reflection in the cracked mirror looked pale, drawn. She splashed cold water on her face and tried to pull herself together. By the time Clara appeared, yawning and complaining about the lumpy mattress, Elara had eaten a piece of dry bread and convinced her stomach to settle. "Ready?" Clara asked. "Ready." The coach to Millbrook was older and more cramped than the carriage Elara had taken from Blackridge. 6 passengers crammed inside, Elara and Clara, an elderly man who smelled like tobacco, a mother with 2 fidgeting children, and a young clerk who kept his nose buried in a ledger. The road was rough, rutted from the storm. Every bump sent Elara's stomach lurching, but she clenched her jaw and focused on breathing. Clara kept up a steady stream of chatter, mostly complaints about her brother-in-law's business sense and how her sister had terrible taste in men. It was oddly comforting, normal, mundane, the kind of problems that didn't involve annulments or secret pregnancies. 3 hours in, one of the children started crying. "I'm hungry," the boy whined, tugging on his mother's sleeve. "We'll eat when we get there," the mother said, exhausted. "But I'm hungry now." The mother closed her eyes like she was praying for patience. Elara reached into her bag and pulled out the apple she'd taken from breakfast. "Here." The mother looked at her, surprised. "Oh, you don't have to." "It's fine. I'm not hungry." Another lie, but the look of relief on the woman's face made it worth it. The boy took the apple and immediately stopped crying. Clara gave Elara a sidelong look. You're too nice for your own good. Maybe. No, maybe about it? People will take advantage. Elara stared out the window at the passing fields. Let them. She'd been taken advantage of for 2 years. One apple wasn't going to make a difference. They reached Millbrook just after noon. The village was smaller than Greymont, quieter. Stone cottages lined narrow streets, and at the center sat a modest square with a fountain that didn't work and a church with a crooked steeple. Clara pointed down one of the side streets. My sister's place is that way. You need help finding your aunt? Elara shook her head. I'll manage. Thank you, though, for everything. Clara shrugged. If it doesn't work out, come find me. I'm serious. My sister's always complaining she doesn't have enough help. They parted ways, and Elara stood in the square, clutching her bag, trying to remember the address from her mother's old letters. Ashworth Books. High Street. She found it tucked between a baker and a cobbler, a narrow building with a faded sign and windows full of books stacked in precarious towers. Her heart was pounding as she pushed open the door. The shop smelled like old paper and dust and something faintly floral. Shelves crammed with books lined every wall, and more books sat in piles on the floor, on chairs, on a desk near the back. Behind the desk sat a woman with graying hair pulled into a severe bun. She wore spectacles and was writing in a ledger, frowning at whatever numbers she was recording. She looked up when the door chimed. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Catherine Ashworth stared at Elara, and Elara stared back. Elara? Her aunt's voice was rough, disbelieving. Hello, Aunt Catherine. Catherine set down her pen slowly. What are you doing here? Elara's carefully rehearsed speech evaporated. She opened her mouth, closed it, then opened it again. I left my husband. I have nowhere else to go, and I'm pregnant. The words hung in the air like smoke. Catherine took off her spectacles, cleaned them on her sleeve, and put them back on. Well, she said finally, I suppose you'd better come inside. Elara's knees nearly buckled with relief. Catherine gestured toward a door at the back of the shop. Through there. Sit. I'll make tea. The living quarters were small. A kitchen barely big enough for 2 people, a sitting room with a fireplace, and a narrow staircase leading up to what Elara assumed were bedrooms. It was cluttered but clean, books everywhere, and it felt more like a home than Blackridge ever had. Elara sat at the kitchen table while Catherine put the kettle on. How far along? Catherine asked, not looking at her. 12 weeks. And your husband doesn't know? No. Catherine turned then, eyebrows raised. Does he know you left? Yes. We annulled the marriage. Before or after you found out about the baby? After. Catherine let out a long breath. Elara, I know. Do you? Because from where I'm standing, you've just made your life incredibly difficult. I know, Elara said again, quieter this time. The kettle whistled. Catherine poured 2 cups of tea and sat down across from her. Why didn't you tell him? Elara wrapped her hands around the cup, letting the heat seep into her fingers. Because he didn't want me. He wanted an heir, and I couldn't be that. I couldn't spend the rest of my life being kept because I was useful. Catherine studied her for a long time. Then she sighed. Your mother would have told you to go back, to do your duty. I know. But your mother also spent 20 years in a marriage that made her miserable. Catherine took a sip of tea. So maybe she would have understood. Elara's throat tightened. You can stay, Catherine said. For now. But this isn't charity, girl. If you're going to be under my roof, you're going to work. I'll do anything. Good. Because this shop barely makes enough to keep me fed, let alone 2 people and a baby. Catherine set down her cup. You'll help with the books, the inventory, repairs, and you'll learn to be useful in ways that don't involve being someone's wife. Elara nodded, blinking hard against the tears she refused to shed. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. You haven't seen the account books. But there was something almost warm in Catherine's voice, something that made Elara think that maybe, just maybe, she'd made the right choice. The first week was brutal. Catherine hadn't been exaggerating about the shop barely scraping by. The account books were a disaster. Unpaid debts, inconsistent pricing, inventory that hadn't been properly cataloged in years. And the building itself was falling apart. The roof leaked, the floorboards creaked, and half the shelves looked ready to collapse. Elara threw herself into it anyway. She cataloged books, reorganized shelves, scrubbed floors, patched leaks. Her hands blistered. Her back ached. And every night she fell into the narrow bed in the tiny room Catherine had cleared for her and slept like the dead. It was nothing like Blackridge. It was better. Catherine was gruff, impatient, and had no tolerance for self-pity. But she was also fair, and she didn't treat Elara like she was fragile. "You're pregnant, not dying," Catherine snapped when Elara hesitated to lift a heavy box. "If you can carry it, carry it. If you can't, ask for help. Don't just stand there looking helpless." Elara carried the box. 2 weeks in, Clara showed up at the shop. "Heard you were here," she said, grinning. "Thought I'd see if you survived." Elara was up on a ladder, dusting the top shelves. She climbed down carefully. "Still alive." "Barely by the look of you." Clara glanced around. "This place is a mess." "I'm working on it." Catherine appeared from the back room, carrying a stack of books. "Who's this?" "Clara. We traveled together." Catherine sized Clara up in about 3 seconds. "You any good with a needle?" Clara blinked. "I'm a seamstress." "Good. The curtains are falling apart. Fix them, and I'll pay you." Clara looked at Elara. Elara shrugged. "All right," Clara said. "But I'm charging you proper rates." "Wouldn't expect anything less." That was how Clara became a regular fixture at Ashworth Books. She'd come by in the afternoons, mending curtains, patching upholstery, complaining about her brother-in-law. And slowly, quietly, she and Elara became friends. Real friends. Not the careful, performative friendships Elara had navigated at Blackridge, but something honest. Clara didn't care that Elara used to be Lady Hale, didn't care about the scandal or the annulment or any of it. She just cared that Elara showed up, did her work, and occasionally laughed at her terrible jokes. It was the first time in years Elara felt like herself, but the pregnancy was getting harder to hide. At 16 weeks, her dresses started getting tight. Catherine noticed immediately. "You need new clothes." "I know." "Can you sew?" "Badly," Catherine sighed. "Clara?" Clara made her 3 simple dresses with high waists and generous fabric. They weren't fashionable, but they were comfortable, and they hid the growing curve of Elara's stomach. "Thank you," Elara said quietly. Clara waved her off. "You can pay me back by naming the baby after me." "Absolutely not." "Your loss." At night, alone in her room, Elara would place her hand on her stomach and feel the tiny flutters that had started a week ago. The baby was real now, undeniable, and terrifying. She had no idea how to be a mother, no idea how to raise a child alone, no idea if she was strong enough, smart enough, brave enough. But she didn't have a choice, so she kept working. She learned how to restore damaged books, carefully cleaning pages, repairing torn bindings, reinforcing spines. Catherine was a harsh teacher, but a good one. She didn't accept sloppy work, and she didn't coddle. "If you're going to do this, do it right," she'd say, ripping out Elara's crooked stitching for the 3rd time. "A book that's repaired poorly is worse than a book that's broken. At least a broken book is honest." Elara redid the stitching. By the time she hit 20 weeks, she could restore a torn page so cleanly you'd never know it had been damaged. Could rebind a spine that would last another 50 years. Could look at a broken book and see exactly what it needed. It was the first time in her life she'd been good at something that mattered. One evening, as they were closing up the shop, Catherine handed her a small leather-bound journal. "What's this?" A client brought in a collection of old manuscripts. "Most of them are worthless, but a few might be valuable if they're restored properly. I want you to assess them." Elara stared at the journal. "You trust me to do that?" "Would I be handing it to you if I didn't?" It was the closest thing to praise Catherine had ever given. Elara took the journal upstairs and spent the next 3 hours carefully examining each manuscript, making notes, sketching out repair strategies. She fell asleep at her desk, ink on her fingers, and dreamed of nothing at all. The letter arrived on a cold morning in late January. Catherine brought it up from the shop, frowning. "This came for you." Elara's stomach dropped. The handwriting on the envelope was precise, formal. She knew that handwriting. She opened it with shaking hands. "Lady Elara, I hope this letter finds you well. I have recently learned that there may have been a misunderstanding regarding the terms of our annulment. My solicitor has raised concerns about certain legal matters that require clarification. I would appreciate the opportunity to speak with you at your earliest convenience. Yours, Adrian Hale. Elara read it twice, then a third time. "What does he want?" Catherine asked. "I don't know." But that was another lie. She knew exactly what he wanted. He'd found out about the baby. And now everything was about to fall apart. Elara's hands went numb. The letter slipped from her fingers and drifted to the floor like a fallen leaf. Catherine bent to pick it up, scanned it quickly, and swore under her breath. "How did he find you?" "I don't know." But even as she said it, Elara's mind was racing. Margot. It had to be Margot. The housekeeper had been kind, sympathetic, but she was still Adrian's employee. And if he'd pressed her, threatened her position... "What are you going to do?" Catherine asked. Elara forced herself to breathe. In through the nose, out through the mouth, the way she'd learned to do when the panic threatened to swallow her whole. "Nothing. I'm not responding." "Elara, he has no legal right to me anymore. The annulment is final. He can't..." She stopped, pressed a hand to her stomach. 22 weeks now. The baby kicked sometimes, little flutters that felt like butterfly wings. "He can't make me go back." Catherine's expression was grim. "He's a lord with money and connections. You're a woman alone with a baby on the way. If he decides to make this difficult, then I'll deal with it." Elara's voice came out sharper than she intended. She softened it. "I'm not going back to that house, Catherine. I'd rather starve." Her aunt studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "All right, but we should be prepared. If he shows up..." "He won't!" Elara picked up the letter, walked to the fireplace, and dropped it into the flames. They both watched it curl and blacken, the precise handwriting dissolving into ash. He's too proud to come himself. He'll send his solicitor, maybe. Or he'll just give up. Even she didn't believe that last part. Catherine sighed. "Get some rest. You look like you haven't slept in days." "I haven't." "We'll start. You're no good to anyone if you collapse." Elara went upstairs, but she didn't sleep. She sat by the window, watching the street below, half expecting to see a carriage with the Hale crest pull up at any moment. It didn't. But the fear didn't leave either. The next 3 weeks passed in a haze of constant vigilance. Every time the shop door opened, Elara's heart jumped. Every time someone knocked, she froze. She started avoiding the main floor during business hours, staying in the back room or upstairs, working on manuscript repairs where she couldn't be seen from the street. Clara noticed. "You're jumpier than a cat in a dog kennel," she said one afternoon, threading a needle. "What's going on?" "Nothing." "That's a lie, and we both know it." Clara tied off a knot and looked up. "Does this have to do with the baby's father?" Elara's hand stilled on the book she was repairing. "What makes you think..." "I'm not stupid. You're clearly running from something, or someone." Clara set down her sewing. "Look, I'm not asking you to tell me your whole tragic backstory, but if there's trouble coming, I'd like to know before it gets here." Elara wanted to deny it, wanted to keep pretending everything was fine, but she was so tired of lying. "My husband, ex-husband, might try to find me," she said quietly. "I left without telling him about the baby, and I think he knows now." Clara whistled low. "That's a mess." "I'm aware." "What's he like?" "The ex." Elara thought about Adrian, the cold precision of him, the way he looked at problems like equations to be solved. "Relentless," she said finally. "When he wants something, he doesn't stop until he gets it." "And he wants the baby?" "He wants an heir. The baby is incidental." Clara made a disgusted noise. "Men, I swear to..." She caught herself. "So what's the plan? Just hide forever?" "If I have to." "That's not a plan, that's a delaying tactic." Clara picked up her needle again, but her expression was thoughtful. "You need leverage, something that makes it not worth his while to drag you back." "I don't have leverage, he has everything. Money, title, legal standing, I have..." Elara gestured at the cramped back room, the pile of damaged books waiting to be repaired. "This." "Then you need to get more." Clara's voice was firm. "You're good at this restoration work, right? Catherine says you're better than anyone she's seen in years." Elara flushed. Catherine had never said that to her directly. "So get better. Get so good that you don't need him. Build something he can't take away." Clara went back to her sewing. "Because hiding only works until it doesn't, and then you're caught with no options." The words stuck with Elara long after Clara left. She thought about them as she worked on a 15th century prayer book that had been damaged by water. The pages were warped, the ink faded, the binding cracked. It should have been beyond saving. But Elara had learned to see past the damage to what the book had been. Could be again. She worked late into the night, carefully separating each page, pressing them flat between sheets of blotting paper, mixing solutions to stabilize the ink. Her back ached. Her fingers cramped. The baby kicked irritably, as if complaining about the late hours. "I know," she murmured. "I'm sorry, but we need this. But we need." By the time she finished, dawn was breaking. The prayer book lay on her work table, still damaged but no longer dying. Given time, careful restoration, it would last another few centuries. She ran her fingers over the repaired spine and felt something shift inside her. Claire was right. Hiding wasn't enough. She needed to be irreplaceable, needed to build a skill so valuable that she could stand on her own, no matter what Adrian tried, and she needed to do it before he showed up. The solicitor arrived on a Tuesday afternoon, 2 weeks after the letter. Elara was upstairs working on a collection of damaged manuscripts that a local estate had brought in. Catherine's voice drifted up the stairs, sharp and confrontational. "She's not here. I was informed this is her place of residence." The voice was male, cultured, utterly unmoved by Catherine's hostility. "Then you were informed wrong." Elara's hand shook. She set down the manuscript carefully and moved to the top of the stairs, listening. "Mrs. Ashworth, I understand your desire to protect your niece, but this matter concerns the welfare of an unborn child. Lord Hale is prepared to be extremely generous in his settlement terms, provided Miss Whitcomb, Miss Whitcomb, is willing to discuss the situation reasonably. She doesn't want his money." "I'm certain she doesn't, but the child has rights, legal rights. Lord Hale is prepared to acknowledge paternity and provide full financial support, education, and eventual inheritance. Surely you can see that's in everyone's best interest." Elara's stomach twisted. He was making it sound reasonable, logical, like refusing was selfish. She descended the stairs slowly, one hand on the railing. Catherine saw her and shook her head sharply, but Elara ignored her. The solicitor was a thin man in his 50s, impeccably dressed, with the kind of face that gave away nothing. He turned when he heard her footsteps, and his expression shifted to something approximating sympathy. "Miss Whitcomb, thank you for seeing me. I didn't agree to see you. You barged into my home." "This is a bookshop," he corrected mildly. "And I knocked. What do you want?" He reached into his bag and pulled out a sheaf of papers. "Lord Hale has authorized me to present you with a proposal. He wishes to provide for the child's future. A trust fund, education at the finest institutions, full acknowledgement of legitimacy. In exchange, he asks only for reasonable visitation rights and involvement in major decisions regarding the child's upbringing." "No." The solicitor's eyebrows rose slightly. "Perhaps you should review the terms before—" "No." Elara's voice was steady. "I don't need to review anything. The answer is no. Miss Whitcomb, be reasonable. You're living in a bookshop, working for subsistence wages. How do you plan to provide for this child? What kind of life can you offer compared to what Lord Hale can provide?" "A life where the child is wanted, not needed." She met his gaze. "Tell Lord Hale that his obligation ended when he signed the annulment papers. This child is not his concern. Legally, I'm afraid that's not accurate. Paternity establishes certain rights and responsibilities. Then let him take me to court." The words came out before she could think them through, reckless and dangerous. "Let him stand up in front of a judge and explain why he annulled our marriage, only to change his mind when it became convenient. I'm sure that will do wonders for his reputation." The solicitor's expression flickered, just for a moment, but it was enough. Adrian wouldn't want a public spectacle, wouldn't want the scandal of fighting over a bastard child when he'd been the one to end the marriage. "I'll relay your response to his lordship," the solicitor said stiffly, "though I suspect he'll be disappointed by your lack of pragmatism." "I'm sure he will be. He always was." The solicitor left, and Catherine immediately locked the door behind him. "That was incredibly stupid," she said. "I know. He's not going to give up. I know that too." Elara's legs felt shaky. She sat down hard on the nearest chair. "But what else was I supposed to do? Accept his terms? Let him control everything again?" Catherine crossed her arms. I'm not saying you should have accepted. I'm saying you should have been smarter about how you refused. Now he knows you'll fight. That makes you a problem. And men like Adrian Hale don't tolerate problems. They eliminate them. The words hit like cold water. What do I do? Catherine was quiet for a long moment. Then she sighed. You do what you said. You get better. Good enough that you have options. Good enough that if he does take you to court, you can prove you're capable of providing for the child. And you do it fast. That night, Elara couldn't sleep. She lay in bed, hand on her swollen stomach, and tried to think. Catherine was right. She needed to be better. But better at what? Manuscript restoration was valuable, but it was slow work, painstaking. It would take years to build the kind of reputation that would keep her financially stable. Years she didn't have. The baby kicked, hard enough to make her wince. I know, she whispered. I'm trying. The idea came to her 3 days later, while she was working on a particularly damaged text, a medical treatise from the 1600s. The pages were brittle, the binding completely destroyed. But the content was extraordinary. Detailed anatomical drawings, surgical techniques that were advanced for their time. A collector would pay a fortune for it, properly restored. Elara stared at the fragile pages spread across her work table. What if she didn't just restore books? What if she specialized in rare, valuable texts, the kind that museums and collectors competed for? It was risky. That kind of work required resources she didn't have, specialized tools, rare materials, connections to buyers, and one mistake could destroy something irreplaceable. But it was the only path she could see that led somewhere other than destitution. She found Catherine in the shop, arguing with a customer over the price of a first edition. I need to talk to you, Elara said when the customer finally left, grumbling. Catherine raised an eyebrow. This sounds expensive. Probably. They went upstairs. Elara laid out her idea, focusing on high-value restoration, building a reputation that would attract serious collectors, creating a business that could actually sustain them. Catherine listened, arms crossed, expression skeptical. Do you have any idea how competitive that market is? She asked when Elara finished. The people who do that kind of work have been trained for decades. They have established relationships, proven track records. You're good, Elara, but you're not. I know I'm not there yet, but I can be. Elara's voice was firm. I'll work harder, longer. I'll learn everything I need to learn. Just give me a chance. Catherine studied her for a long time. Then she sighed. There's an auction in 3 weeks. Estate sale. Some minor nobleman died, left behind a library. Most of it's junk, but there might be a few pieces worth bidding on. If we can get something valuable, restore it properly, and sell it for a profit, then maybe we have the start of something. How much would we need to bid? More than we have. Catherine pulled out her account book, flipped through pages of cramped numbers. I can scrape together maybe 40 pounds. It's every spare penny I have. Elara thought of the leather pouch hidden under her mattress. She'd been hoarding it, terrified of the day the money ran out. She went upstairs and got it. 43 pounds remained. She brought it down and set it on the table. 83 pounds total. Will that be enough? Catherine stared at the money. This is everything you have. Yes. If this doesn't work, then we'll figure something else out. But if we don't try... Elara placed her hand on her stomach. I can't just wait for him to take everything away. I have to fight back. Catherine's expression softened, just slightly. You're your mother's daughter, stubborn as hell. Is that a yes? It's a yes. But if we lose this money, you're not allowed to complain when we're eating stale bread for the next 6 months. Elara smiled despite everything. Deal. The auction was held in a drafty manor house 20 miles outside Millbrook. Catherine arranged for a cart and driver, and they set out before dawn, wrapped in every warm thing they owned. Elara was 26 weeks pregnant now, her stomach obvious even under her cloak. She'd argued that she should stay behind, but Catherine had refused. You're the one with the eye for this, she'd said. I can spot a valuable book, but you can see what it could be. We need that. The manor was crowded with dealers, collectors, and opportunists. Elara felt immediately out of place. Her simple dress and worn cloak stood out among the fine clothes and jeweled fingers. But she kept her head up and followed Catherine inside. The books were displayed in the library, organized by lot number. Most were exactly what Catherine had predicted. Cheap novels, outdated encyclopedias, devotional texts that were neither rare nor beautiful. But in the back corner, almost hidden behind a stack of ledgers, Elara found it. A manuscript. Handwritten. Late 15th century, by the look of the script. The pages were loose, the binding long since disintegrated, but the content. Her hands trembled as she carefully turned the pages. It was a bestiary, illustrated. The drawings were exquisite, dragons and griffins and creatures that existed only in imagination, rendered with painstaking detail. Some of the pages were damaged, ink faded, edges torn, but it was extraordinary. "Catherine," she whispered. Her aunt appeared at her elbow, looked at the manuscript, and inhaled sharply. "How much do you think? If it's authentic? And if we can restore it properly?" Elara's mind raced, calculating. £500, maybe more. And if we're wrong? Then we're broke. The bidding started at £5. Elara and Catherine sat in the back, watching as dealers casually threw out numbers. £10, 15, 20. At £30, most of them dropped out. At 40, only 3 bidders remained. Catherine, a well-dressed man in the front row, and a woman with sharp eyes and expensive gloves. 45, the woman said. Catherine raised her paddle. 50. The man in the front glanced back at them, assessing. Then he raised his paddle. 60. Elara's stomach dropped. They only had £83 total. If the bidding went higher, Catherine hesitated, then raised her paddle again. 65. The woman shook her head and dropped out. It was just Catherine and the man now. He smiled slightly. 70. Catherine's jaw tightened. 75. 80. Silence fell. Every eye in the room turned to Catherine. Elara could see her aunt calculating, weighing the risk. If they bid 83 and won, they'd have nothing left. No buffer, no safety net. One emergency, and they'd be ruined. But if they didn't bid, Catherine raised her paddle. 83. The man studied her for a long moment. Then he shrugged and lowered his paddle. Sold, the auctioneer called. Lot 47 to the lady in the back for £83. Elara's knees went weak with relief. They paid in cash, counted out every penny, and left with the manuscript wrapped in cloth and tucked carefully in Catherine's bag. Neither of them spoke on the ride back. There was nothing to say. They just bet everything on Elara's ability to restore a 500-year-old manuscript without destroying it. And if she failed, they were finished. Back at the shop, Elara laid the manuscript out on her work table and lit every lamp she had. The pages were more damaged than she'd realized in the dim auction house light. Water stains. Tears. Sections where the ink had faded to almost nothing. It would take months to restore properly. Months of careful, exacting work. And she had to do it while pregnant, exhausted, and terrified. But she didn't have a choice. She picked up her tools and got to work. The weeks that followed were the hardest of her life. She worked from dawn until her eyes couldn't focus anymore, then worked some more by lamplight. Her back ached constantly. Her hands cramped. The baby pressed against her ribs, making it hard to breathe. But the manuscript was coming together. Slowly, painstakingly, she repaired each page. Stabilized the ink, reinforced the edges. The illustrations began to emerge from the damage like ghosts becoming solid, brilliant colors, impossible creatures, a world preserved in ink and imagination. Catherine brought her meals that she barely touched. Clara brought her tea and scolded her for not resting. "You're going to work yourself to death," Clara said. "I don't have time to rest." "You're 7 months pregnant. I need this finished." Elara didn't look up from the page she was working on. "I need it perfect." Because perfect meant valuable. Valuable meant safe. Safe meant Adrian couldn't take her child away. At 32 weeks, she finished the last page. She sat back in her chair, hands shaking, and looked at what she'd created. The manuscript was transformed. Still old, still fragile, but no longer dying. Every illustration was visible now, every word legible. It was museum-quality work, and she'd done it. Catherine came upstairs, took one look at the finished manuscript, and sat down hard. "Elara," she breathed, I've never seen anything like this. Do you think we can sell it?" "I think we can sell it for more than £500. Catherine's voice was awed. "I think this might save us." They found a buyer 3 weeks later, a collector from London who specialized in medieval manuscripts. He came to Millbrook personally to inspect the bestiary, spent 2 hours examining every page, and made an offer that left Elara speechless. £800. Catherine negotiated him up to 900. They shook hands. He paid half up front, with the rest to be delivered when he collected the manuscript the following week. That night, Elara counted the money 3 times to make sure it was real. £450. More money than she'd ever seen in her life. More importantly, it was money she'd earned, not inherited, not given, not taken from a husband. Hers. She pressed her hand to her stomach, where the baby was doing somersaults. "We did it," she whispered. "We're going to be okay." For the first time in months, she actually believed it. The letter came the next morning. It was delivered by courier, marked urgent. Catherine brought it upstairs, her expression grim. Elara's hand shook as she opened it. "Miss Whitcomb, I find myself compelled to address this matter directly, as my solicitor's attempts at negotiation have clearly failed. I am arriving in Millbrook on the 15th to discuss the situation in person. I expect you to be available. We will resolve this, one way or another. Adrian." No formality this time. No pretense of politeness. Just a command. Elara looked at the date. The 15th was in 3 days. He was coming, and she had no idea how to stop him. Elara stared at the letter until the words blurred together. 3 days. She had 3 days before Adrian arrived and tried to take control of everything she'd built. Catherine's voice cut through the silence. "What are you going to do?" "I don't know." Elara set the letter down carefully, like it might bite. "Run, maybe. Take the money and disappear before he gets here. And go where? He found you once. He'll find you again." Catherine sat down heavily. "Men like him don't give up, Elara. They just get more determined." "Then what do you suggest?" "I suggest you stop running and start fighting." Catherine's voice was hard. "You've got money now. A skill that's worth something. You're not the same woman who showed up here 8 months ago, terrified and desperate. Stop acting like you are." The words hit harder than they should have. Because Catherine was right, Elara had been acting like a victim, hiding, waiting for the inevitable moment when everything fell apart. But she wasn't powerless anymore. She had options now. Not good ones, maybe, but options. "What if I meet with him?" The thought formed even as she spoke it. "On my terms. In public. Make it clear that I'm not the same woman he discarded." Catherine raised an eyebrow. "That's either very smart or spectacularly stupid." "Probably both." Elara pressed her hand to her stomach. 35 weeks now. The baby was running out of room, pushing against her constantly. "But if I hide, he wins. He gets to control the narrative, decide what happens. If I face him, he might still win. He's got the law on his side, Elara. Paternity rights, inheritance claims, but he doesn't want a scandal." Elara's mind was racing now, pieces falling into place. "That's why he sent his solicitor first. That's why he's coming himself instead of just taking me to court. He wants this handled quietly." "So?" "So I have leverage, the threat of making this public, the annulment, the pregnancy, all of it. It would destroy his reputation." Catherine's expression shifted from skeptical to thoughtful. "That's a dangerous game. Everything about this is dangerous." Elara stood, pacing the small room. "But I'm tired of being afraid, tired of letting him dictate my life from 100 miles away. If he wants to talk, fine, we'll talk. But this time I'm not begging, I'm negotiating." Clara showed up an hour later. Catherine must have sent word, and immediately started making tea like that solved anything. "You're going to meet with him," Clara said. It wasn't a question. "Yes." "That's insane." "So I've been told." Clara poured 3 cups of tea with sharp, angry movements. "What's the plan? You just going to show up 8 months pregnant and hope he feels guilty?" "Men like Adrian don't feel guilty. They feel inconvenienced." Elara wrapped her hands around the cup, letting the warmth seep into her fingers. "But they do feel threatened, and right now I'm a threat to everything he's built. His reputation, his standing, his carefully controlled life. You're one woman with a baby and no husband. He's a lord with money and power. You really think you can threaten him?" "I think I can make him realize that forcing me back would cost him more than letting me go." Elara met Clara's eyes. And I think he's arrogant enough to believe he can still control this situation. That works in my favor. Catherine set down her cup. You'll need witnesses. Make sure he can't twist what's said. I was thinking the coaching in, public enough that he can't intimidate me, private enough to keep this from becoming entertainment. I'm coming with you, Clara said flatly. Clara, I'm coming. You need someone there who's not family, who can testify about what was said if this goes to court, and someone who'll throw a teacup at his head if he tries anything. Despite everything, Elara felt a flicker of warmth in her chest. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. This could still blow up spectacularly. Elara spent the next 2 days preparing. She wrote out everything she wanted to say, crossed it out, rewrote it, practiced her arguments until they were sharp and unanswerable, picked her plainest dress. She wanted him to see what his abandonment had reduced her to, wanted him to understand the consequences of his choices. The night before the meeting, she barely slept. Every sound made her jump. Every shadow looked like Adrian's carriage arriving early. When dawn finally came, she was exhausted but oddly calm. She'd survived leaving Blackridge, survived pregnancy alone, survived building something from nothing. She could survive this. The 15th arrived cold and gray. Elara dressed carefully, braided her hair simply, put on her mother's pearl earrings, the only jewelry she had left. She looked at herself in the cracked mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back. This wasn't Lady Elara Hale, decorative and desperate for approval. This was someone harder, someone who'd learned to fight. Catherine and Clara walked with her to the coaching inn. The Red Stag looked exactly as it had the night Elara had first arrived in Ashford, worn and weathered, the sign still creaking in the wind. The innkeeper recognized her. Lady? She caught herself. Miss, you're back. I need a private room, just for a few hours. The woman's eyes flicked to Elara's swollen stomach, then to Catherine and Clara. Whatever she was thinking, she kept it to herself. Second floor, same room as before. They went upstairs. The room was exactly as Elara remembered, small, drafty, the cracked wash basin still sitting on the table. Clara positioned herself by the window, watching the road. When's he supposed to arrive? Noon. It was 11:30. They waited. Elara sat in the single chair, hands folded in her lap, breathing slowly. The baby was restless, shifting constantly. She pressed her hand to her side, trying to soothe the movement. You don't have to do this, Catherine said quietly. Yes, I do. At 5 minutes to noon, Clara straightened. Carriage coming. Elara's heart hammered against her ribs. She stood carefully, smoothing her dress. Remember, Catherine said, you're not asking permission, you're setting terms. I know. The sound of boots on the stairs. A knock at the door, firm, authoritative. Catherine opened it. Adrian stood in the doorway, and for a moment time seemed to stop. He looked exactly the same. Perfectly dressed, every hair in place, expression controlled and unreadable. But there was something different in his eyes, something sharp and almost desperate. His gaze went immediately to Elara, to her stomach. She watched his face shift through a dozen emotions in the space of a heartbeat, shock, anger, something that might have been regret. Then the mask came back down. Elara. Lord Hale. Her voice was steady. She was proud of that. He stepped into the room and Clara immediately moved to block the door. Adrian glanced at her, then at Catherine, his jaw tightening. I was under the impression this would be a private conversation. You were wrong, Elara said. Sit down. For a moment she thought he'd refuse, but then he pulled out the other chair and sat, still staring at her stomach like he couldn't quite believe what he was seeing. When? He asked. When what? When were you going to tell me? The audacity of the question nearly made her laugh. Never. Something flickered across his face. That's my child. No. This is my child. You gave up any claim when you signed the annulment papers. I didn't know. You didn't care to know. Elara's voice cut like glass. You wanted me gone, Adrian. I left. What happens to me now is none of your concern. You were carrying my heir. That makes it my concern. Your heir. She repeated the words slowly, tasting the bitterness. Not your child, not your son or daughter. Your heir. That's all this has ever been about, isn't it? The title, the legacy. making sure the hail name continues. What did you expect? His voice rose slightly. You knew what our marriage was when we entered into it. I expected basic human decency. I expected that even in a practical arrangement, you might see me as a person instead of a function. She leaned forward. But you couldn't even manage that. So you threw me away, and now you want to take the only thing I have left because it's convenient for you. That's not... He stopped, jaw working. This isn't about convenience. Then what is it about? He was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was lower, almost raw. I made a mistake. The admission hung in the air. What mistake? Elara pressed. Ending the marriage, or not realizing I was pregnant first? Both. He ran a hand through his hair, that gesture she remembered, the only one that betrayed stress. I thought I could find someone else, someone more suitable. But I was wrong. More suitable than a woman you couldn't even have dinner with without looking bored? His eyes snapped to hers. I wasn't bored. You were absent. There's a difference, but it amounts to the same thing. Elara's voice softened just slightly. I tried, Adrian. For 2 years, I tried to be what you needed, but you never told me what that was. Never talked to me, never asked what I thought or wanted or felt. You just expected me to exist in the background and be grateful for it. I didn't know how to talk to you. The words came out rough. You were always so careful, so proper. I never knew what you were thinking. Because you never asked. Silence fell. Clara shifted by the door, and the movement seemed to remind Adrian they had an audience. He looked at Catherine. May we have a moment alone? No, Elara said, before Catherine could respond. Whatever you have to say, you can say it in front of witnesses. I'm done with private conversations that I can't prove happened. His expression hardened. You don't trust me. Should I? He didn't answer. Instead, he reached into his coat and pulled out a document, unfolded it carefully, and set it on the table between them. I had my solicitor draw this up. It's a formal agreement. Acknowledges paternity, establishes a trust fund for the child, guarantees education and inheritance rights. You would retain full custody. I would have visitation rights 4 times a year. Your choice of timing and location. No interference in how you raise the child. Elara stared at the document. It was everything his solicitor had offered before, but written with more detail, more protection for her autonomy. Why? She asked. Because you were right. I threw you away, and I've spent the last 8 months realizing what I lost. His voice was quiet, intense. I can't undo the annulment, can't take back the hurt, but I can make sure our child has everything they need, and I can make sure you're taken care of. I don't need to be taken care of. I can see that. His eyes flicked around the small room, to Catherine and Clara standing guard, then back to her. You've built something here. On your own. That's impressive. The compliment felt strange coming from him. Foreign. What do you want from me, Adrian? I want you to sign this agreement. I want to know my child. Not control them, not take them from you. Just be part of their life. He paused. And I want you to know that I'm sorry for all of it. Elara looked at the document again. The terms were generous, more than generous. The trust fund alone would ensure the baby never wanted for anything. And the custody clause was ironclad. She retained all rights. He got limited visitation. It was everything she should want. So why did it feel like a trap? I need time to think, she said. How much time? As long as I need. Adrian's jaw tightened, but he nodded. Keep the document. Review it with a solicitor if you want. But Elara, he leaned forward, I'm not trying to take anything from you. I'm trying to make this right. You can't make it right. You can only make it bearable. She stood, and he immediately stood as well. I'll consider your offer, but I'm not promising anything. That's all I'm asking. He moved toward the door, then stopped, turned back to her. The baby, are you both healthy? The question caught her off guard. There was genuine concern in his voice. We're fine, she said quietly. He nodded. Looked like he wanted to say something else, but couldn't find the words. Then he left. The moment the door closed, Elara's legs gave out. She sat down hard, hands shaking. Clara immediately knelt beside her. Are you all right? I don't know. Elara's voice came out unsteady. I don't know what just happened. Catherine picked up the document, scanned it quickly. This is actually quite fair, almost suspiciously fair. That's what worries me. Elara pressed her hand to her forehead. Why would he offer this? What does he gain? Maybe he's telling the truth, Clara suggested. Maybe he does regret what he did. Or maybe he's realized that fighting me publicly would damage his reputation more than a generous settlement would. Elara took the document from Catherine, reading through it more carefully. The language was precise, protective of her rights, but there was a clause near the end that made her pause. What is it? Catherine asked. This section, about the child's education and upbringing. It says I retain all decision-making authority, but I must consult with him on major decisions. What counts as major? Who decides? That could be interpreted a dozen different ways. Catherine frowned. That's a problem. It's deliberate, Elara said. He's leaving himself room to argue later, to insert himself more than the document suggests. Clara swore under her breath. So what do? Elara stared at the paper, mind racing. Adrian had made an offer that looked fair on the surface, but buried in the details were opportunities for him to assert control, to slowly reclaim authority over her and the baby. She couldn't sign this. Not as it was written. But she also couldn't just refuse. That would push him into court, where his money and connections would overwhelm her hard-won independence. She needed a third option. I'm going to rewrite this, she said slowly. Make it actually fair. Remove every ambiguous clause, every loophole. Make it so clear that there's no room for interpretation. You think he'll accept that? Catherine asked. I think if he's serious about making this right, he'll have to. Elara set the document down. And if he's not, then I'll know exactly what I'm dealing with. They returned to Millbrook that afternoon. Elara went straight to her room and spread the agreement out on her work table. For the next 3 days, she dissected every line, every phrase. Anywhere the language was vague, she tightened it. Anywhere Adrian had left himself wiggle room, she closed it. She redefined major decisions to a specific list: medical emergencies, changes in residence, formal education. Anything else was solely her authority. She added a clause that if Adrian attempted to use his influence to interfere with her business or reputation, all agreements would be void and custody would default entirely to her. She specified exact visiting dates, 4 times a year, each visit no longer than 3 days, at locations she would designate. When she finished, the agreement was twice as long and 10 times as explicit. Catherine read it over breakfast. This is good. Very good. But he's going to fight you on half of these changes. Then we'll negotiate. But I'm not signing anything that gives him power over me again. The response came a week later, not from Adrian, but from his solicitor. The man arrived unannounced, looking even more pinched than before. Miss Whitcomb, Lord Hale has reviewed your proposed amendments, and he finds several of them excessive. Elara crossed her arms. Which ones? The clause about interference with your business. He feels it's unnecessarily punitive. I feel it's necessarily protective. The solicitor's mouth thinned. He's also concerned about the specificity of the visitation terms. 4 visits of 3 days each, at your discretion, is quite limiting for a father. It's more than generous for a man who wanted nothing to do with me when I could still be useful. Elara's voice was cold. Those are my terms. If he doesn't like them, he can take me to court. I'll make sure every newspaper in the country knows about the lord who annulled his marriage and then tried to claim the child he'd abandoned. The solicitor blanched. Miss Whitcomb, there's no need for threats. That's not a threat. It's a promise. She stepped closer. I spent 2 years being quiet and accommodating and trying to be what he wanted. It got me nothing. So now I'm done being quiet. Either he accepts my terms or we do this the hard way. His choice. The solicitor left looking thoroughly rattled. 2 days later, a new document arrived. Adrian had accepted most of her changes. Not all. He'd negotiated back on a few points, proposed compromises on others. But the core protections she'd demanded were intact. Elara read it 3 times, showed it to Catherine, who read it twice more. This is acceptable, Catherine said finally. Not perfect, but acceptable. So I should sign it. That depends. Do you trust him to honor it? Elara thought about Adrian standing in that inn room, something almost broken in his eyes when he'd apologized. Thought about the care he'd taken with this revised agreement, actually listening to her demands instead of just steamrolling over them. "I don't trust him," she said slowly. "But I trust this document, and I trust that I'll fight him if he violates it." She signed it that afternoon. Sent it back with explicit instructions that both copies were to be filed with a solicitor and a magistrate, making this a legal contract, not just a private agreement. A week later, the papers came back countersigned. Adrian had also included a banknote for the first year's support payment, £200. More money than she'd earned from the manuscript. Elara stared at it for a long time. Then she took half of it and bought proper tools for restoration work, specialized brushes, rare pigments, acid-free papers. Invested in her business instead of just surviving. The other half went into a separate account, for the baby, for emergencies, for freedom. 3 weeks later, at 39 weeks pregnant, Elara was working on a new project, a damaged, illuminated manuscript from the 1400s. When the first pain hit, she set down her brush carefully, breathed through it. "Catherine!" she called down the stairs. Her aunt appeared in the doorway, took one look at Elara's face and immediately went pale. "Is it?" "Yes." "Now?" "Apparently babies don't wait for convenient timing." Catherine swore and ran for the midwife. The labor lasted 14 hours. Elara had read about childbirth, had thought she was prepared for the pain. She wasn't. But Clara stayed with her through all of it, holding her hand, wiping her forehead, telling increasingly absurd stories about her sister's husband just to keep Elara distracted. When the baby finally came, a boy, screaming and red-faced and absolutely perfect, Elara burst into tears. The midwife cleaned him, wrapped him in blankets, and placed him in Elara's arms. "He's healthy," she said. "Good lungs, good weight. You did well." Elara couldn't speak, could only stare at this tiny person, this impossible creature she'd made and carried and protected. He had dark hair, Adrian's nose, her mother's chin. He was hers. "What are you going to name him?" Clara asked softly. Elara had been thinking about it for months, had considered family names, meaningful names, names that sounded impressive or important. But looking at her son now, only one name felt right. "Elias," she said. "Elias Whitcomb." Not Hale, never Hale. This child would carry her name, her legacy, would grow up knowing he was wanted, not needed, loved, not obligated. Catherine appeared in the doorway, looking exhausted and relieved. "How are you?" "Tired, happy." Elara looked up, tears still streaming down her face. "We did it." "You did it." Catherine came closer, looking at the baby with an expression Elara had never seen on her stern aunt's face. Soft, almost tender. "He's beautiful." "He is." Over the next few days, word spread through Millbrook. The bookshop owner's niece had a baby. No husband, but a healthy child and enough money to make the scandal almost respectable. People talked, of course. They always would. But Elara found she didn't care. She'd survived everything Adrian and society and her own fear had thrown at her. She'd built a life, a business, a future. And she'd done it alone. Well, not entirely alone. Catherine and Clara had been there every step. But she'd made the hard choices herself. Had fought for what mattered. 2 weeks after Elias was born, another letter arrived from Adrian. Elara opened it with one hand, the baby asleep against her shoulder. "Elara, I was informed that the child was born. A son. I'm told he's healthy and you're both well. I'm pleased to hear it." "In accordance with our agreement, I will not request visitation until he's 6 months old. But I wanted you to know that I'm thinking of you both. The next support payment will arrive at the end of the month. If you need anything before then, you have only to ask. Regards, Adrian." It was the most human letter he'd ever written to her. No commands, no expectations, just information. And an offer of help that didn't feel like obligation. Elara folded it carefully and tucked it into the drawer where she kept important documents. She didn't know what the future held. Didn't know if Adrian would honor their agreement or if she'd spend the next 18 years fighting him. But she knew one thing with absolute certainty. She wasn't afraid anymore. That night, with Elias asleep in the cradle Catherine had built, and the account book showing actual profit for the first time in the shop's history, Elara sat by the window and looked out at Millbrook. This small village, this cramped bookshop, this life she'd cobbled together from desperation and determination. It wasn't what she'd planned, wasn't what anyone would have chosen for her, but it was hers, and that made it worth everything. 6 months passed like water through her fingers. Elara learned that time moved differently with a baby. Days stretched endlessly, feeding, changing, soothing, and yet somehow entire weeks vanished before she realized they'd started. Elias grew fast, changing almost daily. His eyes settled into a gray blue that reminded her painfully of Adrian. His hair stayed dark. He smiled at 6 weeks, laughed at 3 months. And by 6 months, he was sitting up on his own, grabbing at everything within reach. The shop changed too. Word had spread about Elara's work on the bestiary. The collector in London had apparently shown it to everyone he knew. Requests started coming in. Small ones at first. A damaged prayer book, a torn atlas, a family Bible with water damage. Elara took them all, working late into the night while Elias slept in his cradle beside her work table. She charged what the work was worth, not what she thought people would pay, not what felt safe, what it was actually worth, and people paid. By the time Elias turned 6 months old, Ashworth Books had more restoration requests than Catherine could track. They'd hired Clara part-time to help manage the influx, and even then, they were turning work away. "We need more space," Catherine said one evening, looking at the stack of projects waiting. "And more hands. We can't afford to expand," Elara said, though her tone was uncertain. The account books told a different story now. They had money, not wealth, but actual sustainable income. "Can't we?" Catherine pulled out the ledger, pointed to the numbers. "We're profitable, Elara, consistently. If we took out a small loan, bought the building next door, hired a proper assistant, that's a huge risk. So was betting everything on that manuscript. So was leaving Blackridge." Catherine looked at her steadily. "You've spent 6 months proving you can do this. Maybe it's time to stop acting like it might all disappear tomorrow." Elara looked at Elias, who was chewing on a wooden rattle and drooling everywhere. He grinned at her, gummy and delighted. She'd built this for him. But she'd also built it for herself. And Catherine was right. It was time to stop being afraid of her own success. "All right," she said, "let's do it." They bought the building next door 2 weeks later, a narrow structure that had been a tailor's shop before the tailor died. It needed work, but the bones were good. Catherine hired a carpenter to knock through the wall between the 2 buildings, creating one larger space. They installed proper lighting, bought new shelving, set up a dedicated restoration workshop. Elara designed the workspace herself. Separate areas for different types of repair, organized by the materials and tools required. It was efficient, professional, the kind of place that announced competence before you'd even seen the work. They hired 2 assistants. One was a young woman named Margaret, who had steady hands and endless patience. The other was an older man named Thomas, not the driver who'd brought Elara to Ashford, but a former bookbinder who'd lost his shop to debt and was grateful for the work. Elara trained them both personally, teaching them to see past the damage to what the book needed. Margaret had a gift for delicate work, for coaxing apart pages that seemed fused together. Thomas understood structure, binding, the architecture of a book. Together, they transformed Ashworth Books from a struggling shop into something else entirely. The first time someone referred to it as Millbrook's premier restoration house, Elara had to sit down. "Did you hear that?" Clara asked, grinning. "I heard it. I don't believe it." "Believe it? You've built something real here." "Real. Yes, it was real." She could touch it, measure it, see the proof in the account books, and the waiting list of clients, and the respect in people's eyes when they brought her their damaged treasures. It still didn't quite feel like hers. The letter arrived the week before Elias's first visitation with Adrian. Elara had been dreading it for months, this first meeting between father and son. She'd negotiated the terms carefully. 3 days, at a neutral location, with her present the entire time. Adrian had agreed without argument, but the letter changed everything. "Elara, I'm writing to request a modification to our agreement. Rather than meeting at a coaching inn, I would like to invite you both to Blackridge for the visitation. I understand this may be uncomfortable for you, but I believe Elias should see his father's home, know where he comes from. I give you my word that you will be treated as an honored guest. Separate quarters, complete autonomy over Elias's care and schedule. This is not an attempt to trap you or reclaim authority, simply an opportunity for our son to understand his heritage. Please consider it. Adrian Elara read it 3 times, looking for the manipulation, the hidden agenda. She couldn't find one. "What do you think?" she asked Catherine. Her aunt frowned at the letter. "I think he's either being sincere or he's gotten much better at lying." "That doesn't help." "Do you want to go?" Did she? Elara tried to imagine walking back into Blackridge, into those cold rooms and empty halls. Tried to imagine showing Elias the place she'd fled from. "I don't know," she said honestly. "Part of me wants to refuse just on principle, but another part—" She paused, choosing her words carefully. "He's right that Elias should know where he comes from. Even if I hate that place, it's part of his history." "Then go. But take backup." Catherine's expression was fierce. "Clara and I will come with you. Make sure he keeps his word." "You don't have to—" "We're coming. End of discussion." So 3 weeks later, Elara found herself in a hired carriage, heading back toward Blackridge Manor. Elias on her lap, and Catherine and Clara flanking her like bodyguards. Her stomach churned the entire way. The estate looked exactly the same, gray stone walls rising against gray sky, windows like empty eyes. The gardens were still skeletal, still cold. Nothing had changed, except her. The woman who'd left here 18 months ago had been broken, desperate, running from ghosts. The woman returning was someone else entirely. The carriage stopped at the main entrance. A footman opened the door, and Elara stepped down carefully, Elias balanced on her hip. He was looking around with wide eyes, taking in everything. The front door opened. Adrian stood there, perfectly dressed as always, but there was something different in his posture, something almost uncertain. His eyes went immediately to Elias. For a long moment, no one moved. Then Adrian descended the steps slowly, stopping a respectful distance away. "Elara, thank you for coming." "Lord Hale." Her voice was steady, professional. His gaze shifted to the baby. "May I—" He stopped, cleared his throat. "May I meet him?" Elara adjusted her hold on Elias, who was now staring at Adrian with intense curiosity. "Elias, this is your father." The words felt strange in her mouth. Adrian stepped closer and Elara watched something crack in his controlled expression. He was looking at Elias like he'd never seen a child before, like he couldn't quite believe this small person existed. "He has your eyes," Adrian said quietly. "He has your nose." "I suppose that's fair." Adrian's mouth twitched. Not quite a smile, but close. "May I hold him?" Elara hesitated. This was the moment she'd been dreading, handing her son to the man who'd thrown her away. But she'd agreed to this. And Elias deserved to know his father. She passed him over carefully. Adrian took Elias awkwardly, like he'd never held a baby before. He probably hadn't. Elias immediately grabbed Adrian's cravat and yanked. "He does that," Elara said. "You'll want to—" But Adrian was already carefully extracting his neckcloth from the baby's grip, his expression somewhere between bewildered and fascinated. "He's strong. He's determined. Gets that from both of us, I think." Adrian looked up at her, and something in his expression made her chest tight. "Will you come inside? I've had rooms prepared." The house was exactly as she remembered, cold, formal, imposing. But Adrian led them to the east wing, to rooms Elara had never seen before. They were warm, brightly lit. One room had been converted into a nursery, complete with a crib, toys, and soft rugs on the floor. The other was a sitting room with comfortable furniture and a fireplace already burning. "I had these prepared for you," Adrian said. "For all of you." He nodded to Catherine and Clara. "There are additional guest rooms down the hall, whatever you need." Elara stared at the nursery. It wasn't ostentatious or showy, just practical, comfortable. The kind of space designed for actual use, not display. "Thank you," she said quietly. Adrian handed Elias back to her. "I'll leave you to settle in. Dinner is at 7, if you'd like to join me. But there's no obligation. You're free to do as you please." He left before she could respond. Catherine looked around the rooms, eyebrows raised. "Well, this is unexpected." "He's trying," Clara said. "Or he's performing," Elara countered. But even she didn't quite believe it. That first evening, she took dinner in her room, partly because she was exhausted, partly because she wasn't ready to sit across from Adrian and pretend things were normal. But the next morning, when a maid knocked softly to ask if she'd like breakfast in the garden with Lord Hale, Elara surprised herself by saying yes. The garden looked different in daylight. Still skeletal, still cold, but there were signs of early spring, small shoots pushing through the hard ground, trees beginning to bud. Adrian was waiting at a small table, 2 place settings laid out. He stood when she approached, Elias in her arms. "Thank you for coming." "It's your house. I can hardly refuse breakfast." "You could. You've refused plenty of things I've offered." There was no bitterness in his voice, just observation. They sat. A servant brought tea and toast, soft boiled eggs, fruit. Simple food, nothing showy. Elias made grabbing motions at everything, and Elara had to constantly redirect his hands. "Does he always do that?" Adrian asked. "Constantly. He's curious about everything. Like his mother." Elara looked up sharply. "You never noticed that before." "I never noticed a lot of things before." Adrian's voice was quiet. "I was too busy being certain I knew exactly what I wanted, what mattered. Didn't leave much room for actually paying attention." "No, it didn't." They were quiet for a moment. A bird called somewhere in the garden. "I've been thinking," Adrian said slowly, "about what you said, that I never asked what you thought or wanted. You were right. I treated our marriage like a contract that would execute itself if I just left it alone." "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I owe you the truth, even if it's too late to matter." He set down his teacup. "I convinced myself that you were fine with how things were, that you'd known what you were getting into, that it was enough. But the truth is I was relieved you didn't ask for more, because I didn't know how to give it." Elara felt something twist in her chest. Not forgiveness exactly, but recognition. "I didn't know how to ask for it," she admitted. "I was taught that being a good wife meant being accommodating, undemanding, so I tried to be that, and all it did was make me invisible." "You were never invisible to me." Adrian's voice was rough. "I just didn't know what to do with what I saw." Elias chose that moment to let out a shriek and lunge for Adrian's teacup. Elara caught him just in time, and Adrian actually laughed, a real laugh, startled and genuine. "He's got your determination too," Adrian said. "You said that already." "Did I? Well, it bears repeating." Over the next 2 days, a strange rhythm developed. They'd take meals together, not in the formal dining room Elara remembered, but in smaller, warmer spaces. They'd walk the gardens with Elias, who delighted in grabbing at leaves and dirt and anything within reach. They'd sit in the nursery while Elias played, talking about small things, safe things. Adrian asked about her work. She told him about the restoration projects, the expansion, the assistants she'd hired. He listened like he actually cared about the answers. She asked about the estate. He told her about improvements he'd been making, problems with tenants, a dispute over water rights with a neighboring property. They didn't talk about the marriage. Didn't talk about what had gone wrong or what might have been different. They just existed in the same space, co-parenting, finding a rhythm that almost felt normal. On the 3rd day, as they were preparing to leave, Adrian asked if he could speak with her privately. They went to his study, the same room where he'd ended their marriage nearly 2 years ago. Elara's stomach clenched at the memory. Adrian must have noticed because he immediately said, "We can go somewhere else if you'd prefer." "No, it's fine." She sat in the same chair she'd sat in that night. "What did you want to say?" He didn't sit. Instead, he stood by the window, looking out at the gardens. "I've been thinking about the agreement we made," he said finally. "The visitation schedule." Elara's hands tightened on the armrest. "If you're about to ask for more time, I'm not." He turned to face her. "I'm going to ask for something harder." "What?" "I want to propose a new arrangement, not legally binding, just something we try." He took a breath. "What if you and Elias came here for a month each summer? Not as my wife, I understand that's finished, but as partners in raising him. You'd have complete autonomy, your own wing, your own schedule. I wouldn't interfere with your work or your life in Millbrook, but for 1 month a year, Elias would have both his parents in the same place." Elara stared at him. "Why?" "Because watching you with him these past 3 days, I've realized something. You're a remarkable mother. Patient, attentive, completely devoted. And he's remarkable because of it. Adrian's voice was steady. But I also see how hard you're working, how much you're carrying alone, and I think if we could find a way to do this together, even in this limited way, it might be better for all of us. You want to co-parent. Yes, but only if you agree. Only if it works for you. He paused. I'm not trying to fix what's broken between us, Elara. I'm trying to build something new. Something that might actually work. She thought about it. About spending a month each year at Blackridge, in the house she'd fled from. About letting Adrian into Elias's life in a real, sustained way. About the possibility that maybe, they could find a way forward that didn't require forgiveness, just cooperation. I need time to think about it, she said. Of course. Take all the time you need. She stood to leave, then paused at the door. Adrian? Yes? Thank you for trying. It doesn't fix everything, but it's something. It's a start, he said quietly. The journey back to Millbrook felt different than the journey there. Lighter, somehow. Like something heavy had been set down. Clara noticed immediately. You're smiling. I am? You are. What happened? Elara looked down at Elias, who was sleeping in her lap, exhausted from 3 days of new experiences. I think we might have figured something out. She told them about Adrian's proposal. Catherine listened carefully, then nodded slowly. It could work, if he keeps his word. That's the question, isn't it? Elara said. Whether he'll actually honor it. Only one way to find out, Clara said. Try it. See what happens. You can always walk away again if it doesn't work. That was true. She could always walk away. She wasn't trapped anymore. Back in Millbrook, life resumed its rhythm. Work, feeding Elias, training Margaret and Thomas, expanding the business. But now there was a letter every week from Adrian, short updates about the estate, questions about Elias, nothing demanding or presumptuous. Elara found herself responding, writing back with her own updates, her own questions. They were building something, not a marriage, not even quite a friendship, but a connection. Fragile, tentative, based on mutual respect instead of obligation. It was more than they'd ever had before. 3 months later, Elara made her decision. She wrote to Adrian accepting his proposal. 1 month each summer at Blackridge under her terms. She listed them out explicitly. No expectations beyond co-parenting, complete freedom to work on her restoration projects, the ability to leave at any time if the arrangement stopped working. His response came within a week. Agreed. All of it. I'll have the East Wing prepared. Thank you for trusting me with this. Adrian. That summer, when Elias was 14 months old, they returned to Blackridge. It was strange at first. Elara kept expecting to feel trapped, suffocated by the memories. But the house felt different now. Warmer. Adrian had made changes. Hired new staff who were friendly instead of cold, opened curtains that had been closed for years, filled vases with flowers from the gardens. He'd made it livable. They established a routine quickly. Mornings with Elias, both of them, playing with him, teaching him to walk. He was so close, wobbling everywhere. Afternoons, Elara spent working on restoration projects in a room Adrian had set up for her, complete with all the tools and materials she could need. Evenings, they'd have dinner together, talking about their days. It was almost domestic, almost normal. One evening, about 2 weeks into the visit, they were sitting in the garden while Elias toddled around chasing butterflies. Can I ask you something? Adrian said. You just did. He smiled slightly. Fair. Can I ask you something else? Depends on the question. Do you ever think about what might have happened if I'd been different from the start, if I'd actually tried to know you? Elara was quiet for a long moment, watching Elias grab at flowers. Sometimes, but I think we both had to become different people first. The woman I was when we married, she would have kept trying to be what you wanted, would have kept shrinking herself to fit, and you would have kept not noticing. And now I know what I'm worth, what I can do. And you, she looked at him. You actually see me. Maybe because I'm not asking you to. Maybe because we're not trapped in that awful dynamic anymore. I don't know, but it's different. It is. Adrian was quiet. For what it's worth, I think the woman you've become is extraordinary. And I'm sorry I didn't see it before. Didn't help you become it. I didn't need your help. That's the point. But her voice was softer than the words. I needed to do it myself. Needed to prove to myself that I could. You did. You built something real, Elara. Something that matters. She looked at the restoration workshop he'd set up for her, at Elias playing in the garden, at this strange new piece they'd found. We both did, she said. By the end of the month, Elara realized something that surprised her. She didn't want to leave, not because she felt obligated to stay, not because she was trapped, but because for the first time, Blackridge didn't feel like a prison. It felt like possibility. On the last evening of the visit, after Elias was asleep, Adrian asked if she'd take a walk with him. They wandered through the gardens in the twilight, not talking, just existing together. Finally, Adrian stopped by the old fountain that still didn't work. I have a proposal, he said, and I need you to hear me out before you refuse. Elara's stomach tightened. All right. What if we didn't limit this to 1 month a year? What if... He took a breath. What if you made this a base? Not moving here permanently. I know you love Millbrook, and your business is there. But what if you had both? You could split your time. Work from here when you wanted. Go back when you needed. Elias would have both places, both communities. Adrian, I'm not asking you to come back as my wife, he said quickly. I'm asking if we could build something new. A partnership. Co-parents who actually like each other, who respect each other, who choose to be in each other's lives, not because we're obligated, but because it works. Elara stared at him. You're asking me to live here part-time. I'm asking if you'd consider it. Only if it works for you. Only if you want to. He met her eyes. I'm not the same man I was, Elara, and you're not the same woman. Maybe that means we could actually do this right this time. She thought about it, about what her life would look like with this kind of flexibility. She could hire more assistants in Millbrook, train them to handle projects independently, could set up a second workshop here, take on larger restoration commissions, could give Elias a childhood that included both places, both worlds, could choose to be here instead of being trapped here. I need to think about it, she said. Of course. And if I agree, it's on my terms. Completely. No expectations beyond what we explicitly agree to. Understood. And if it stops working, you leave. No questions, no guilt. Just leave. His voice was steady. I'm not trying to trap you, Elara. I'm trying to give you options. Options. Yes, that was what this was. Not a cage, an opportunity. She thought about it for 3 weeks. Discussed it with Catherine, who surprised her by being supportive. Talked to Clara, who pointed out that Elara could afford to hire her full-time to manage the Millbrook shop. Looked at her finances, her workload, her life, and realized that she wanted this. Not because she needed it, not because Adrian was asking, but because it made sense. Because it gave her more space, more resources, more possibilities. Because she was choosing it. She wrote to Adrian with her answer. Yes, but we're doing this as a formal partnership agreement. Written, specific, with clear terms about finances, time, responsibilities. I'm not leaving anything to assumption. If you can agree to that, then yes. Elara. His response was immediate. Whatever you need, however you want to structure it. Just, yes. Thank you. Adrian. They spent the next month negotiating the agreement. It was businesslike, practical, and utterly unromantic. They divided expenses, established schedules, outlined decision-making processes. It looked nothing like a marriage. It looked like respect. 6 months later, Elara stood in the newly renovated east wing of Blackridge Manor, looking at the restoration workshop she'd built. It was twice the size of the one in Millbrook, with better lighting, more space, access to resources she'd only dreamed of before. She'd just finished a commission for the British Museum, a 15th century book of hours that had been considered too damaged to save. They'd paid her £3,000. £3,000 for her work, her skill. She was 26 years old, a mother, a master restorer, a woman with 2 homes and complete autonomy over her own life. She'd built this. All of it. You're smiling again, Adrian said from the doorway. She turned. He was holding Elias, who was nearly 2 now, and talking in constant streams of half-intelligible words. I am? You do that a lot now. Smile. He came closer. It suits you. It suits me because I'm happy. Are you? There was genuine curiosity in his voice. She thought about the work she loved, the son she adored, the life she'd carved out of nothing, about this strange, functional partnership she and Adrian had built from the wreckage of their marriage. Yes, she said. I think I actually am. Elias squirmed to get down. The moment his feet touched the ground, he toddled over to Elara's work table and grabbed at a brush. Elias, no, she started, but Adrian was already gently redirecting their son. Not that one. That's Mama's work brush. Here, you can have this one. He handed Elias a clean brush, and the toddler immediately started waving it around like a sword. Elara watched them together, Adrian patient and engaged, Elias delighted and curious, and felt something settle in her chest. This wasn't the life she'd imagined when she'd married Adrian 4 years ago. It was better, because it was real, built on honesty and choice and hard-won understanding, built on the ruins of what hadn't worked, but stronger because of it. What are you thinking about? Adrian asked. That we did it, she said quietly. We actually figured it out. We did, though I think you did most of the figuring. He smiled slightly. I just finally learned to listen. That's not nothing. No, I suppose it's not. Elias dropped the brush and ran over to Elara, arms up. She picked him up, settled him on her hip. Mama, he said, patting her face. Mama work? Mama's done working for today. Papa play? Adrian's expression softened at the word. It had taken months for Elias to start calling him that, but now it came easily. Papa will play, he said. What should we play? Outside. Outside it is. They walked down to the gardens together, the three of them, and Elara thought about how far she'd come, about the woman she'd been, trapped, invisible, desperate for crumbs of affection, about the woman she'd become, strong, skilled, independent, about how sometimes the worst thing that happens to you is the thing that forces you to become who you were always meant to be. She'd lost everything when Adrian ended their marriage, and in losing it, she'd found herself. The gardens were blooming now. Adrian had hired a proper gardener, and the skeletal trees had filled out, the empty beds overflowing with color. Elias ran ahead, chasing a butterfly, shrieking with laughter. Adrian walked beside her, close but not touching. Thank you, he said quietly. For what? For giving me a second chance. Not to be your husband, I know that's over, but to be his father. To be part of this. He gestured at the garden, at Elias, at her. I didn't deserve it, but I'm grateful for it anyway. Elara looked at him, really looked. Saw not the cold, distant lord she'd married, but someone who'd learned to be human. Who'd learned that control wasn't the same as strength, that vulnerability wasn't weakness. We both deserve it, she said. We both had to become better people to get here. You're not the only one who needed to change. Maybe. But you were braver about it. I didn't have a choice. You always had a choice. You just chose not to settle. He met her eyes. That takes courage. Ahead of them, Elias fell down, sat up, and immediately started laughing. Neither of them rushed to him. They'd learned he preferred figuring things out himself. He's going to be like you, Adrian said. Stubborn and brilliant and completely unwilling to accept limitations. He's going to be like both of us, Elara corrected, which means he'll be absolutely impossible. Terrifying thought. Better get used to it. They stood there in the garden, watching their son explore the world with fearless determination, and Elara felt something she hadn't felt in years. Peace. Not the absence of struggle, not the end of hard work or difficult choices, but the deep, settled knowledge that she'd built something that couldn't be taken away from her. She'd built herself. And that was enough. More than enough. It was everything.